We must give more foreign aid to Zambia. We must have forced school busing. Welfare recipients should not be forced to work.
Once upon a time, there was a very liberal senator from Massachusetts who had the same solution to every problem. More federal spending, more taxes, and more wasteful bureaucracy.
We have to pay Panama to take our Panama Canal.
In Washington, they're not listening anymore. He's been too liberal for too long.
More government, more agencies, more spending.
As you can see, all's fair in love, war, and politics. So if your opponent thinks he's been unfairly attacked in your advertising, there's almost nothing he could do about it, especially late in the campaign.
When he ran for president in 1952, Adlai Stevenson said, "Let's talk sense to the American people." But he failed to mount a major media campaign built around short TV commercials like his opponent, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Ike for president, Ike for president, Ike for president. You like Ike, I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington. We don't want John or Dee or Harry. Let's do that big job right. Let's get in step with the guy that's hep. Get in step with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington. We got to get where we are going. Travel day and night for president. Let Adelaide go the other way. We'll all go with Ike. President, you like Ike, I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington.
From Abilene, out of the heartland of America, out of this small frame house in Abilene, Kansas, came a man, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Through the crucial hour of historic D-Day, he brought us to the triumphant peace of VE Day. Now another crucial hour in our history. The big question.
General, if war comes, is this country really ready? It is not. The administration has spent many billions of dollars for national defense. Yet today, we haven't enough tanks for the fighting in Korea. It is time for a change.
The nation, haunted by the stalemate in Korea, looks to Eisenhower. Eisenhower knows how to deal with the Russians. He has met Europe's leaders, has got them working with us. Elect the #1 man for the #1 job of our time. November 4th, vote for peace. Vote for Eisenhower.
In sifting through over 9,000 political commercials, we found one that was made for the Stevenson effort in 1952, part of the limited spot campaign which Adlai basically opposed as being too superficial.
We must lower taxes, Bob.
Yes, Ike, we must lower taxes.
But we have to spend more for defense, Bob.
You see, Ike, we agree perfectly.
Bob.
Ike.
Bob.
Ike.
Will Bob give Ike the additional money for defense after Ike cuts taxes? Stay tuned for a musical interlude. Reuben, I've been thinking about the general and his mob. If you're voting for the general, you really are electing Bob. Let's vote for Adlai and John.
Back in 1964, in one of the bitterest presidential battles ever fought in this country, Barry Goldwater and Lyndon Johnson were locked in mortal combat. You know, in a tough race, you have to be very careful that what you say doesn't come back to haunt you. Remember when Michigan's George Romney came back from a trip to Vietnam, complaining he'd been brainwashed?
It ruined his chances for the presidential nomination. I mean, who is going to vote for someone who's perceived as brainwashed?
I was going for the...
Goldwater really shot from the lip when he speculated about lobbing a nuclear bomb into the men's room of the Kremlin. Quotes like that can become a nightmare if your opponent's on his toes.
Eat your words!
In a Saturday Evening Post article dated August 31st, 1963, Barry Goldwater said, "Sometimes I think this country would be better off if we could just saw off the eastern seaboard and let it float out to sea." Can a man who makes statements like this be expected to serve all the people justly and fairly? Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. I have submitted an economic plan that I've worked out in concert with a number of fine economists in this country, all of whom approve it, and believe that over a 5-year projection, this plan can permit the extra spending for needed refurbishing of our defensive posture, that it can provide for a balanced budget by 1983, if not earlier, and that we can afford, along with the cuts that I have proposed in government spending, we can afford the tax cuts I have proposed.
With these projections, we will have a balanced budget by fiscal year 1981 if I'm elected president.
Jimmy Carter's 1981 budget had a $29.8 billion deficit. During his 4 years in office, Jimmy Carter increased the national debt 42%. And with Jimmy Carter as president, federal spending increased 57%.
And if I'm elected president, and if I'm elected president, and if I'm elected president.
We trusted Jimmy Carter once. Can we afford to trust him again?
If you're creating advertising for a candidate who feels uncomfortable singing their own praises, you might design a campaign that just attacks their opponent.
Accentuate the negative.
Epton, a distinguished legislator, lawyer, and businessman. Washington, found guilty of unlawfully converting clients' money to his own use and barred from practicing law for 5.5 years. Epton, honored repeatedly for service to his country and his community. Washington, convicted and jailed for repeated criminal tax law violations. The U.S. attorney said he didn't even file his returns for 19 consecutive years. Which one do you think should be Chicago's next mayor?
On 6 votes in the U.S. Senate to extend benefits for disabled veterans, Wendell Anderson missed all 6. He didn't vote on aid to handicapped children or to fund the emergency farm bill. He missed 7 votes to help the elderly, 12 defense bills, 7 appropriations bills, aid to schools. First, he appoints himself to the job. Then he doesn't show up for work. Let's elect a senator who will.
On May 7, 1971, Warren and Rosina Matthews were gunned down in their Marietta home. 7 men were convicted, but later had to be set free because the district attorney bungled the case. That district attorney was Buddy Darden. Judge Joseph Moy blamed Buddy Darden for the failure to pursue important leads in the case. Buddy Darden has proved his bad judgment by making mistakes that set killers free. Why send him to Congress so he can prove it again?
Our show is not just about selling candidates, but also promoting causes. Sometimes a candidate runs on a single issue, and so represents a cause. Ellen McCormick was such a candidate when she ran on an anti-abortion platform in 1976.
If you have children in the room, you may not want them to see this next spot. It's pretty graphic. And whether or not you agree with the position this commercial takes, there's no denying the power of persuasion of the well-thought-out advertisement.
I'm Ellen McCormick, a Democratic candidate for president, and I've asked Dr. Mildred Jefferson to speak to us today on the subject of abortion. Dr. Jefferson?
Thank you, Ellen. Some of you may prefer not to see what I'm going to show in a few seconds, but I hope many of you will choose to watch because it contains information often kept from the general public. These are the feet of a baby only 10 weeks after conception, a little over 2 months. The baby is being held by a doctor wearing surgical gloves. Here is a baby at 11 weeks after conception and another baby at 24 weeks. Tragically, many babies like these lose their lives in a very painful way through abortion. In one kind of abortion, the child is literally pulled apart. In another kind, salt solution sends the baby into convulsions. Together, we can stop abortion. Together, we can help both the mother and her baby.
Thank you, Dr. Jefferson.
Vote Ellen McCormick in the Democratic presidential primary.
Now let's look at some other highly creative pitches for a variety of causes. You'll note that in spots that follow, humor is effectively used along with a strong attitude.
On November 7th, go out and help someone vote. On November 7th, go out and help someone vote. On
November 7th, go out and help someone vote.